I always think there was something I could have done differently. My one job was to look out for her, and that has not happened. And I'm going to keep looking out for her now as best I can.
You don't just disappear from the middle of the ocean, especially not when, just weeks earlier, you were already trying to leave. Lynette Hooker had a plane ticket booked. She had left before, and according to the people closest to her, things on that boat were not what they looked like online. But that's not the story you've been told. Because officially what happened is this. On the night of April 4th, 2026, Lynette went overboard during a dinghy ride in the Bahamas, and her husband says it was a tragic accident. No witnesses, no body, just a story. But here's the problem. The more you look at that story, the timeline, the behavior, the decisions made in those critical hours, the harder it becomes to believe that this started in the water. Because what if Lynette Hooker's disappearance didn't begin the night she vanished? What if it began long before anyone realized she was trying to get out? And if that's true, then the most important question in this case isn't just what happened that night. It's what was already happening on that boat before they ever left it. This is everything we know. Before we go any further, I need you to understand something. This case is not as simple as a woman going overboard in the middle of the ocean. Because in the past few days, new details have surfaced. Details that don't just raise questions about what happened that night, but about everything that may have led up to it. So here's what we're going to do in this episode. First, we're going to break down the timeline, but not the version you've been hearing. We're going to look at it from a different angle, starting before Lynette ever stepped into that dinghy. Second, we're going to examine what was happening behind the scenes. Her attempts to leave, the state of the relationship, and the pieces of her life that suggest this story didn't begin on April 4th. And third, we're going to walk through the night she disappeared, step by step, holding every detail up against what we now know, and asking the questions that still haven't been answered. Because right now, there are two versions of this story. There's the version that says this was a tragic accident, a sudden moment in rough waters that no one could have predicted. And then there's the version that starts earlier, quieter, less visible, but possibly far more important. Now, before we go any further, Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. He has denied any wrongdoing, and this remains an active investigation. What we're doing here is examining the facts, following the evidence, and asking the questions that matter. That's it. Now, if you're new here, and you want updates as this case continues to develop, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Yes, do it now. Because this story is still unfolding, and you don't want to miss what comes next. Alright, let's start with Lynette. We are going to deep dive into everything that happened with her. Before she became the center of an investigation, Lynette Hooker was someone who had already lived an entire life on land. She was 55 years old, a mother, a woman who, by every account, had built stability over decades, working, saving, planning for a future that most people would consider secure. And then, she walked away from it. Lynette didn't just take a vacation. She didn't just try something new. She sold everything. The house, the furniture, the life she had spent years building. And in its place, she chose something completely different, life at sea. For the last 4 years, Lynette and her husband, Brian Hooker, had been living full-time aboard their sailboat, a 46-foot vessel they named Soulmate. Together, they documented that life online, posting videos of quiet anchorages, paddle boarding in clear water, sea turtles drifting just beneath the surface. If you watch those clips back now, it looks like freedom. It looks like two people who made a decision most of us only talk about, and actually followed through. A life without borders, without routine, without limits. And for a while, it seemed like it worked. But here's where things start to shift. Because when you look just a little closer, not at the highlight moments but at the details around them, there are signs that this life may not have been as seamless as it appeared. According to people close to Lynette, this wasn't the first time she had tried to leave. There were moments where she stepped away from that life on the boat, returned to family, created distance. And then, at some point, she would go back. We don't know every detail of those decisions. But we do know this. Just weeks before she disappeared, Lynette had a plane ticket booked. A way off the boat. A way out. She never used it. And that raises a question that becomes very difficult to ignore. If this life was everything it appeared to be on the surface, why was she preparing to leave it behind? Because when someone builds a life that looks perfect from the outside, but quietly starts making plans to walk away from it, that's usually not random. That's usually the beginning of something. And in Lynette's case, it may have been the beginning of the part of this story that no one saw coming. Now let's move to the night everything changed. April 4th, 2026. This is where, according to Brian Hooker, the story begins. But as you listen to what he says happened, I want you to keep one thing in mind. This version of events comes from a single source. And while he has denied any wrongdoing and has not been charged with a crime, investigators are still working to verify exactly what took place. According to Brian, the day started normally. He and Lynette spent time out on the water, using their small dinghy to move between locations around the Bahamas. They visited familiar spots, places they had been before, eventually stopping for dinner and drinks that evening. At some point after that, as the sun was setting, they began heading back toward their sailboat, Soulmate. And that's when, according to his account, everything went wrong. Brian says the conditions began to shift. Winds picked up. The water became choppy. Visibility started to drop as night set in. And then, during that return trip, he says Lynette went overboard. In his own words, she fell from the dinghy. What happened in the moments immediately after that is critical, because it's the only explanation we have for why Lynette has never been found. Brian says he tried to respond. He says he called out to her. He says he attempted to locate her in the water. He says the darkness made it difficult to see. At some point, according to his account, the situation escalated beyond what he could control. And then, time passed. Hours passed. By the time Brian reached land and contacted authorities, it was early the next morning. Roughly 8 hours after Lynette was said to have gone into the water. 8 hours before anyone else knew she was missing. 8 hours before any organized search could begin. Now, that detail alone has raised questions, not conclusions, but questions. Because in a situation where someone goes overboard, especially at night, time is everything. Every minute matters. And yet, based on what has been reported, there was a significant gap between the moment Lynette allegedly disappeared and the moment help was finally alerted. There are also other parts of this timeline that investigators are continuing to examine. For example, the exact route taken that night, the conditions on the water at that time, and the sequence of decisions made in those critical hours. Some of that information has been shared publicly. Some of it is still being verified. And some of it doesn't fully line up yet. Again, that doesn't tell us what happened. But it does tell us that this timeline, the one that begins with a dinghy ride at sunset and ends with a missing person, is not as settled as it might first appear. Because when a story depends entirely on a single account, every detail matters, every gap matters, and every unanswered question becomes part of something bigger. So before we move forward, we need to do exactly what investigators are doing right now. Slow this down, look at each piece carefully, and ask a simple question. Does this timeline fully explain what happened to Lynette Hooker that night? Or are there parts of it that still don't make sense? Because the more closely you examine those hours, the more this stops feeling like a clear sequence of events, and starts feeling like something we don't fully understand yet. The investigation began to shift away from the open water, and back toward the boat. Not the dinghy, not the route described that night, but the vessel itself, Soulmate. Authorities moved quickly. Within days of Lynette Hooker being reported missing, officers from the Royal Bahamas Police Force secured the sailboat and obtained a warrant to examine it. What they were looking for wasn't immediately visible. It wasn't something that could be seen from the deck or understood from a quick inspection. They were looking for data. Inside Soulmate was a network of onboard systems, navigation equipment, communication devices, and digital logs that record movement, positioning, and activity over time. These systems are standard on many vessels, but on this particular boat, they were described as more advanced than usual. And that matters. Because unlike memory, these systems don't rely on recollection. They record. Investigators began extracting information from those devices, working to establish a clearer picture of what the boat was doing on the night of April 4th, and in the hours surrounding it. At the same time, a separate detail started to gain attention. Tracking data associated with Soulmate showed a gap. For a period of several hours during the night Lynette disappeared, the boat's signal was not transmitting. Then later it resumed. Gaps like that can happen for a number of reasons. Technical interruptions, signal limitations, environmental conditions, but they can also raise questions. And in an active investigation, questions matter. Authorities have not publicly stated a conclusion about that gap. What they have done is treat it as part of a broader effort to understand the sequence of events, not just where the dinghy may have gone, but what was happening at the main vessel itself. That focus is important because it reflects a wider shift in how the case is being examined. This is no longer just about a reported incident on open water. It is about context. What was happening on that boat in the hours before Lynette was last seen? What systems were active? What records were created? And what, if anything, might those records reveal? While that analysis was underway, investigators were also looking beyond the boat, toward people who may have been nearby. Anchorage areas like the one where Soulmate was located are rarely isolated. Boats are often positioned within visible distance of one another, especially in well-known locations. That means there is a possibility, however small, that someone else was there that night. Someone who may have seen movement, heard something unusual, or noticed details that didn't seem important at the time. As part of that effort, investigators began identifying vessels that were in the area during the relevant time frame, working to locate individuals who might provide additional context. This step is routine in maritime investigations, but it can be critical, because when timelines are unclear, and when accounts rely heavily on a single perspective, independent observations can become one of the few ways to either support or challenge what has been described. At this stage, authorities have not released the full scope of what has been recovered from the boat systems, nor have they detailed the results of every interview conducted. What they have confirmed is that the investigation remains active, and that multiple lines of inquiry are being pursued at the same time. The boat, the data, and the possibility that someone else somewhere nearby may hold a piece of what happened. Individually, each of these elements may seem incomplete, but together they form the foundation of a much larger question. Not just what occurred on the water that night, but whether everything that could explain it has been fully accounted for. When you bring all of it together, the picture doesn't close. It expands. What began as a single account of a moment on the water has become something far more complex. An investigation built on timelines, data, and the possibility that not every detail has been fully explained. On one side, there is the version of events that has been stated publicly. A night on the water, changing conditions, a sudden accident. That version has been repeated, defended, and maintained. And legally it stands because no charges have been filed, and no conclusion has been officially reached. But alongside that version, there is everything else. There is the fact that investigators moved quickly to secure Soulmate and extract its data. There is the tracking gap, hours where the vessel's signal was not transmitting, followed by a return to normal operation. Authorities have not publicly concluded what caused that gap. There is the ongoing analysis of onboard systems, navigation records, communication logs, and electronic data that could confirm movement, activity, or changes made during the critical time frame. There is the decision to expand the investigation beyond the boat itself, to look outward, to identify other vessels that were present in the same anchorage, and to publicly ask for help locating a sailboat whose occupants may have seen something that has not yet been accounted for. That request matters, because it tells you that, even now, investigators are not relying on a single narrative. They are still searching for confirmation, or contradiction, and that search is ongoing. At the same time, the broader reality remains unchanged. Lynette Hooker has not been found. Search efforts have been carried out. Areas have been covered based on drift patterns, weather conditions, and the available timeline. Those efforts have been scaled back, but not forgotten. Her family continues to ask questions. Investigators continue to work, and the case itself has not been closed. What exists right now is not an answer. It is a set of facts, and a set of gaps between them. A timeline that has been described, and a timeline that is still being tested. A location where something happened, and the possibility that more than one perspective exists on what that something was. And at the center of all of it is a boat. A vessel equipped with systems designed to record, track, and document movement. A vessel that was there that night. A vessel whose data is now part of an active investigation. If the account given publicly is accurate, then those records will support it. They will align. They will confirm that what was described is exactly what occurred. But if there are differences, if the data shows something that hasn't been fully explained, then that changes how this entire case is understood. Because in situations like this, the truth doesn't come from a single statement. It comes from what can be verified, from what can be matched, from what holds up when every piece is placed side by side. Right now, that process is still unfolding. The boat remains where it was left. The data remains under review. The witness who may have been nearby has not yet been publicly identified. And the answers, whatever they turn out to be, are still ahead. Until then, this case remains exactly where it is now. Open, unresolved, and waiting for the moment when every piece finally fits together. And if you've stayed with this to the end, then you already understand something most people don't. This isn't just about what happened that night. It's about finding the truth no matter how long it takes. So if you want to follow this case as it develops, if you want every update, every new detail, every shift in the investigation the moment it happens, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next piece of this story could change everything. And when it does, you'll want to see it for yourself. And before you go, I want to hear from you. Based on everything you've seen, everything you've heard, what stands out to you the most? Not conclusions, not accusations, just the detail that you can't ignore. Drop it in the comments, because sometimes the smallest observation is the one that brings everything into focus.